The dining room in my father's colonial home in Stamford, with its oak-paneled walls, always seemed more like a judge's chambers than a place for meals. Gleaming crystal glasses stood in precise rows on the table, catching the harsh glow of the chandelier, while the sharp clink of silverware echoed like a gavel strike. It was here, over plates of prime rib and glasses of Bordeaux, that my father passed his judgment. "No surprise you're still unmarried at 35, Judge Richard Hartwell declared, his voice calm and measured, as if delivering a ruling from the bench. A wave of laughter rolled across the table. My aunt hid her grin behind her napkin. My cousin Bradley's fiancé offered a strained chuckle, and the rest of the family played their parts in this rehearsed drama. I did what I'd been taught since I was a child. I sat tall, kept my face composed, and locked my true feelings away where they couldn't be touched. Only I knew that, just 20 minutes before, Ethan had kissed me in the parking lot of a nearby country club. Only I knew that our daughter, Clara, was back in Portland, likely lining up her dolls in a mock courtroom, debating bedtime with fierce conviction. My father thought he was ridiculing a disappointment. In truth, he was mocking a woman who had already crafted a life he couldn't fathom. I sipped my wine, just as he'd instructed me at 16, as if poise outweighed authenticity. His gaze slid past me, already shifting to Bradley's career, the kind of polished success that fit his vision of legacy. His insult lingered like dust on the tablecloth, and I left it there untouched, while the truth pressed against my chest, waiting for the moment I'd set it free. For 3 years, I'd performed a role my father would have applauded, if only he knew the effort I put into keeping up appearances. In New Haven, I maintained a small apartment with plain walls, a simple sofa, and enough books on the shelves to seem lived in. A few suits hung in the closet, a French press sat on the counter, and the fridge held just enough to pass inspection if my father made a surprise visit. He had a key. Naturally, Judge Richard Hartwell always had access, both literal and figurative. To him, privacy was just a gap to be sealed. He saw respectability as something you constructed piece by piece, with a flawless resume, a suitable spouse, and an address in the right part of town. Even in retirement, his role on the boards of half the charities in Fairfield County kept his schedule packed and his judgment razor sharp. Nothing pleased him more than using his network to weigh in on his children's reputations. Yet, while he praised my apparent independence in New Haven, my real life blossomed across the country in Portland. There, Ethan and I had bought a 1920s craftsman home with creaky floors and a wide porch that dipped slightly in the rain. Clara's colorful drawings were pinned to the fridge. Ethan's coding manuals sprawled across the coffee table, and the air carried a faint scent of lavender and cinnamon. It wasn't flawless, but it was ours, unimpressive by Connecticut standards, yet more vibrant than anything I'd known growing up. I navigated these two worlds like an actor changing costumes, delivering lines in one life while living freely in the other. But the longer I juggled both, the more I felt the pressure mounting. How long could one woman sustain 2 lives before the truth demanded to be revealed? My earliest memories aren't of playtime, but of posture, shoulders squared, chin raised, steps calculated as if every hallway in our home was a stage. By age 7, I was enrolled in violin lessons, not because I loved music, but because it was refined. By 9, I attended etiquette classes where my knuckles were tapped for gripping a soup spoon too firmly. By 12, I was reminded that my friends, hobbies, and future husband would reflect not just on me, but on the Hartwell name. I once told my father I wanted to be a journalist, drawn to the excitement of capturing stories and uncovering truth. He didn't even glance up from his Wall Street Journal. "Journalism isn't a career," he said. "It's a hobby. You need a profession that earns respect." The conversation ended before it began. My mother, Caroline, was the only one who softened his edges, slipping me novels under the table or tucking notes into my school bag to encourage my dreams. But when she died suddenly from an aneurysm one icy January morning, the burden of expectation doubled. I was 20, barely grown, and now the only daughter of a widowed judge who saw it as his duty to mold me into perfection. Grief didn't slow him down, it fueled him. My days filled with internships he endorsed, luncheons where I was expected to shine, and constant reminders that my duty was to marry well. He handpicked the men, Sons of colleagues and old friends, each presented like a strategic alliance. I learned to smile courteously, make excuses, and swallow my objections with the champagne. Every choice he made for me added another stone to a foundation I never agreed to lay. Yet I carried it, brick by brick, until the weight became too much. It was under that burden that I first dreamed of breaking free, though I didn't yet know where it would take me. The job offer landed in my inbox on a dreary Tuesday, like a challenge I hadn't expected. A Portland tech startup needed a communications director, and somehow, my resume had found its way to them. When I told my father, he laughed dismissively. Portland? That's not a career move, Celia. That's running away. Maybe he was right, but the idea of freedom sparked something in me. I wanted to choose my home, my work, my identity. Within a month, I packed my car with only the essentials, books, a few boxes of clothes, and the notebooks I'd kept hidden since I was a teenager, and drove west until Connecticut's winter faded into Oregon's rain. In Portland, anonymity felt like a deep breath. I picked my own apartment, a drafty walk-up with chipped paint and a view of the Willamette River. No one critiqued my curtains or my guest list. I learned the city's pulse, its scent of coffee and wet cedar, its people who didn't care about your last name's weight. I met Ethan at a local cafe, not at some orchestrated dinner. He was hunched over his laptop, chuckling at his own code, and when he looked up, his smile caught me off guard. A Seattle native, he built software tools for nonprofits. We started with coffee, then riverside walks, then dinners that lasted past midnight. Organic, unscripted moments of two people choosing each other repeatedly. 2 years later, he stood in our tiny kitchen, holding a velvet box he'd stashed in the junk drawer. The ring was understated, a sapphire framed by small diamonds, nothing my father would have chosen, but exactly what I loved. Celia, he said, his voice steady but his eyes searching, will you marry me? I said yes before he could finish. We eloped that December on Cannon Beach, barefoot in the chilly sand, the Pacific crashing behind us. Our friends stood as witnesses, as I pulled my coat tighter against the wind and vowed myself to Ethan. No orchestra, no embossed invitations, just love, freedom, and the certainty that I'd finally claimed something for myself. If love grows in freedom, why does fear still hold me silent? Clara was born on a rainy Portland night, the kind that left the streets shimmering. Holding her for the first time, I thought, here is proof that joy can exist, that it can breathe and clutch your finger with fierce strength. Ethan wept openly beside me, unembarrassed. For a moment, the world beyond that hospital room felt irrelevant. But when I wrote her name on the birth certificate, the old weight returned. How could I tell my father? How could I present a granddaughter to a man who didn't even know I was married? His judgment loomed over me. Even as I rocked Clara to sleep, a shadow stretching across her crib. I built walls of lies to protect us. On social media, I curated the image of a single professional, smiling at work events, posting carefully framed photos that left out Ethan, captions hinting at late nights and business trips. When I visited Connecticut, I left Ethan and Clara behind, claiming work deadlines. I even rented furniture for the New Haven apartment once, anticipating my father's unannounced visit. He came, running his hand along the arm of a borrowed sofa, as if inspecting it for flaws. Ethan tried to understand, knowing my father's approval was never freely given. But I saw the hurt in his eyes when I asked him not to share photos of Clara online, or when I crafted excuses for why he couldn't attend a family wedding. It's like we're shadows, he said one night, his voice weary. I'm your husband, Celia. She's your daughter. How long do we stay hidden? By the time Clara started talking, the lies cut deeper. She pointed at her reflection and said, Clara. She called Ethan Daddy. Then one afternoon while I folded laundry, she asked Grandpa. I froze. She'd never met him, never seen his picture. The word came from her like intuition, and it struck me harder than any of my father's criticisms. What kind of mother teaches her child to hide before she understands what secrets are? Clara was sprawled on the living room rug, her dolls arranged for a pretend tea party, when she looked up at me with eyes too knowing for her age. Why don't I have a grandpa? She asked, her small hands busy with plastic cups. The question hit harder than any of my father's rebukes. She had no reason to feel the absence, no memory to compare it to. Yet she sensed it, a gap in her world, an empty seat at her table. I knelt beside her, brushing her hair, searching for words that wouldn't sow shame. "You do have a grandpa," I whispered. "He just lives far away." She nodded, seemingly content, but I saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes. That night, as Ethan dried dishes at the sink and I tucked Clara into bed, he turned to me, arms crossed, dish towel gripped tightly. "She's starting to notice," he said. "She's not a baby anymore. You can't keep pretending your father doesn't exist." "I know," I said, but the words felt empty. "You're asking her to live inside your lie," he continued, "and it's wearing us down, Celia. It's wearing me down." I wanted to explain that my father's approval had been the currency of my life, one I could never earn but still feared losing. Instead, I nodded, and the silence between us grew heavier than any argument. That silence broke a week later when, during a phone call, my father paused. "Was that a child's voice?" he asked, his tone sharp as a blade. I brushed it off, blaming the neighbor's TV. He didn't reply, and the call ended abruptly. The next day, my brother told me my father had hired a private investigator. The air around me tightened. Every knock at the door felt like a threat, every unknown number a warning. My carefully built world was fraying, the mask slipping. Would the truth unravel by accident, or could I find the courage to reveal it first? The dining room in Stamford hadn't changed since that first cutting remark. The mahogany table gleamed like a mirror, the china sparkled under the chandelier, and my father sat at the head, presiding like a judge over his court. I'd flown in alone, as always, leaving Ethan and Clara behind. By then, the private investigator's shadow loomed, though my father hadn't yet confronted me. Halfway through dinner, as my cousin shared news of a promotion, my father's gaze turned to me. "And Celia," he said, his voice slicing through the conversation, "still no husband, no children, still squandering your potential. Truly pathetic at 35. The laughter that followed was soft but sharp, smirks, a muffled cough. The familiar sting rose in my chest, but this time it didn't fade. Something inside me broke, as if years of swallowing his disdain had worn through my restraint. I looked at him across the table, his silver hair glinting in the light, his posture rigid. For the first time, I saw not power, but fragility, a man gripping control to fend off irrelevance. I didn't argue or correct him. I set down my fork and let the silence envelop me. In that moment, I decided I was done hiding. The next time I came to this city, I wouldn't come alone. I wouldn't shrink under his gaze. My father was planning his annual gala, the pinnacle of his prestige, where every colleague, benefactor, and rival gathered. That would be the moment, the place, where the truth would break free. When that moment comes, will my truth set me free or unravel everything I've built? The marble floors of Stamford's Civic Hall rang with the rustle of tuxedos and gowns. The Hartwell Legal Foundation Gala was in full swing, crystal chandeliers glowing like captured stars. For years, I'd entered this room alone, the dutiful daughter making her appearance. This time, I walked in with Ethan's hand in mine and Clara holding my other, her dress a soft shade of sky blue. Whispers spread like wildfire, a wave of shock rippling through the crowd. Colleagues, neighbors, distant relatives, all turning, eyes narrowing, lips parting as they realized what they were seeing. My husband, my daughter, my hidden life, revealed not in a whispered rumor, but in the open, under lights too bright to ignore. My father took the stage, his tuxedo sharp, his smile rehearsed, delivering his annual speech with precision, extolling justice, tradition, and family values. The irony pressed against my chest until I couldn't breathe. Before my courage faltered, I stepped forward. "Allow me to introduce my family," I said, my voice ringing clearer than I'd expected. "This is my husband, Ethan Mallister, and our daughter, Clara." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. A gasp came from the front row. Someone whispered, 3 years. Others stared, their eyes flicking between me and my father. Richard's smile vanished, his jaw tightening like stone. Fury and betrayal flashed across his face, but he held his composure, the mask of a man unused to being caught off guard. Clara squeezed my hand, looking up at me with wide, trusting eyes. I met my father's gaze and held it. What does a patriarch do when his carefully curated legacy is undone by the daughter he thought he controlled? The silence broke into murmurs, then arguments, spreading through the hall like fractures in glass. My aunt clutched her chest, whispering, "Why didn't you tell us?" My cousin muttered about family embarrassment. A few guests nodded with something like admiration, but others clung to my father's anger as if loyalty demanded it. Richard stepped off the stage, his voice low but cutting. "You lied to me. You lied to everyone. You made me look foolish." I stood firm, though my knees trembled. "I built a life, Father. That's not deceit, it's survival." He turned to the crowd, as if addressing a jury. At 35, she hides a marriage, a child, for 3 years, and chooses this moment, my moment, to reveal her betrayal. Before I could respond, Ethan spoke, his voice steady and commanding. "She didn't shame you. She protected herself from your judgment, your control, and she owes you no apology for creating something beautiful you couldn't envision for her." His words hung like a verdict, and for once, my father had no reply. His face paled, then flushed. Without another word, he turned and strode out, the doors slamming behind him. I felt the tremor in my hands only when Clara's small fingers tightened around mine. Terror and freedom collided in my chest, so intense I couldn't tell which would win. The voices around me swirled, but none mattered. The weight I'd carried for years had shattered, and though the edges were sharp, the air felt clear. When the truth explodes, is survival enough, or must you also seek reconciliation? Back in Portland, the air was lighter, scented with pine and rain instead of perfume and judgment. Our home was just as we'd left it, Clara's crayons scattered on the table, Ethan's coffee mug beside his laptop. I stood in the doorway, breathing deeply, as if stepping across that threshold marked the divide between who I'd been and who I was now. That evening, Clara climbed into my lap, her hair still carrying the scent of lavender shampoo. "Is Grandpa coming to visit?" she asked, her eyes bright with a child's untainted hope. I paused, then chose honesty. "I don't know, sweetheart." Her shoulders dipped, but she nodded, as if she already grasped more than I wished she did. Weeks passed in a fragile calm. Then a letter arrived, my father's sharp handwriting etched across the envelope. Inside was no apology, no regret, just a single page. He named Clara, acknowledging her as his granddaughter, admitting that while he didn't understand my choices, he couldn't deny her existence. I read it twice, feeling something shift, not forgiveness, not love, but a fissure in the wall he'd built. For the first time, I realized his approval no longer defined my worth. I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer, not as a keepsake, but as a milestone. In the next room, Clara's laughter mingled with Ethan's as they played a game of chase. I knew where my home truly was. They tried to keep me small, but by choosing love over approval, I became whole. When freedom costs your father's approval, is it a loss or the only path forward? Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories like this.